Griffin and Megan, we don't want to put you on the spot, but since we're a tiny little group, we'd love to see your faces if that's possible, but that's not meant as pressure on you. We totally understand that you're like, no, I'm eating my lunch, or I've got all kinds of things going on. And yeah, so it's not meant as pressure on you. Hey, Griffin.
Hey,
Hey, tell us where you're from. Let's do a quick round of introductions, and we'll get going.
yeah. I'm from Morgantown, West Virginia, home of WVU and the Morgantown Mall.
The Morgantown Mall.
Yeah,
Awesome to see you, Griffin.
good to see you as well.
Dave, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. This is David Messer. I'm in Elkins, West Virginia. I'm with the Youth Build North Central. Uh, Youth Build North Central, West Virginia. I'm the case manager here.
West Virginia's in the house.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, Megan, let's tag you in. And wonderful to see you all, by the way.
I am Megan Wadden. I'm from California Heritage Youth Build Academy in Redding, California, where it's currently like 117 degrees outside.
Oh, Megan. Well, that's enough reason to not have your Zoom camera
And
on.
it has been for weeks, and it's still going to go on for weeks. So
Yeah.
Come to the coast, Megan. Come to the coast.
I was over at the coast about 2 weeks ago. So nice and cool there, 86 degrees.
Well, now
Okay,
it's
well,
probably 68 degrees. So
well, we'll just go a little further north from there, and let's have our Alaska friends introduce themselves. Josh, you want to go? And then
Sure, yeah. Josh Flowers, Covenant House, Alaska, Anchorage. And so 86 is still too hot. So,
it was for us too, Josh.
68 is perfect.
And hi, everybody. Aliska Champagne Vasalka. Nice to see you, Josh. We represented the state today and everyone else. I am in Juneau, Alaska, with a technical assistance coach with Youth Build USA, coach with the LEAP initiative, and just doing some work generally in the field. So happy to be here today.
Grand to see you. Thank you. And it's like old home day. Dorothy. Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I'm not on screen. I'm not in a place where I can go on screen, but I love seeing you all. Aliska, I haven't seen you in a long time. Wonderful to see you. And Kathy and Kim, of course,
Dorothy.
we saw each other recently.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm supposed to know anyone else on the call, but I don't think I do. I'm the former CEO of Youth Build USA. And the reason I'm here now is because I've been working with some young people to start a new project called Youth Create. And we want to make sure that we have rural and indigenous representation, and that we're thinking about the issues appropriately. So that's why I'm here. And thank you, Kim, for convening us.
Thanks for being here, Dorothy.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have access to chat, you'll see we've dropped a couple things in that you might just find helpful to have. We are recording. So while this is informal, we're recording because folks really like being able to get, as don't we all when it comes to these sessions that we rarely can make at their actual time, but then to get to listen to it later. But if anyone at any point is uncomfortable with that, just let us know. We will hit pause, or we will just not share the recording, because there's a variety of reasons why people might not want that, and we ultimately respect your confidentiality and safety. Okay, so without further ado, welcome. I'm Kim Phinney, and my colleague in all of this is Kathy Moxon, and we're talking to you from either sides of the coast. And we are the co-founders of Rural Youth Catalyst. Oh, that's right. I'm supposed to move slides. So just, give me a second here.
Hey, Kim,
Well-
can you also, when you get a chance to breathe, can you redrop the 2 links in? Because people who came late won't have them.
Yeah, okay. I will do that. So welcome to what is now we're calling our Rural Learning Series. In the early days, this was a learning community. It was primarily a group of rural youth build programs from across the country. And then when COVID hit, and even though Kathy and I had stepped away from Youth Build USA, everyone wanted to continue to just get to be in community with each other. And so we continued to just meet monthly, and then word sort of spread more and more. And as we were expanding the type of work that we were doing, we discovered that there were programs all across the country that were working with rural young people in and out of school, carrying different identities, but the pieces that they all had in common were young people primarily coming from communities that were in the predominantly high poverty regions, and that these were often young people that were on the margins. So we expanded, and then we have shifted to turning this into a learning series where we attempt to offer different folks with what we think is relevant information, topics, and we're attempting to do this on a quarterly basis. Occasionally, you might see a special one pop up. So last time we had the folks from Citizens University and their project Citizens Redefined, and they were wanting to share their work with rural youth practitioners. So we invited them on. And the next one will be in September, and we'll give you a little slide about that at the end. So all of these are meant to be, this is not, while Kathy and I are about to share a whole lot of information about what we've been up to, these are meant to be conversational, and informal in that sense. So feel free to interrupt us, to drop a question into chat. We will do our best to pay attention and to monitor, or to just unmute yourself and say, yo, hold on, I have a question to ask, or wait, what did you mean by that? Or whatever it is you might want to share. Today, our goal is to update you all and share this work that we've been doing and the framework that we've created, a well-being framework for rural young people, and to invite you, if you're not already with us, in terms of how we think about centering well-being is the main outcome for rural youth. So our goals for this conversation over about the next 50 to 60 minutes is to introduce you to the framework, help you think about, offer some ways you can begin to use the framework, mostly because, after all, this is kind of a webinar sort of thing, is to spark conversation and deeply invite you to collaborate with us going forward, and invite you to join a learning community that we hope to have later this fall or in the coming months, that goes deep and long around how to implement the framework. If nothing else, here's some things we hope you take away from the next our time together, is that first, this is a framework. The framework is an approach. This isn't a set program model. There's not set ways that we're saying things need to happen. And that everyone plays a role in rural youth well-being and within this framework. That this is ultimately, our work is focused on collective well-being, and that it is not that collective, if we are truly doing the work of collective well-being, then we are focused on equity. It's not equity and collective well-being, it's equity in well-being, as Kathy is always pointing out to everyone. They're not two separate things, inextricably linked, and inherently this work is at the core is equity. That this work is to do collective well-being. It is ultimately the work is on deep systems and structural change, but that happens in lots of different ways. And that we are all, by choosing to focus on this, working towards an emergent future, and that it's not easy, it's not quick. There's not just lovely little sound bites to be grabbed or a few wellness workshops to do, and we're all just whole and good and our communities are thriving. One of the quotes that one of the pieces that has really influenced Kathy and I, or one of the individuals in her work, for many years now, has been the work of the civil rights activist and theologian Ruby Sales. But particularly the quote that has guided this work is the one you see here, which is, how is it that we develop a theology or theologies in a 21st century capitalistic technocracy where only a few lives matter? And it's really this last question: how do we raise people up from disposability to essentiality? And if you haven't read Ruby's work, we encourage you to do so. There's a great interview that she does with Krista Tibbetts on Being, and you can easily Google that. But for us, underlying all of this is, how do we raise people, and particularly rural young people, and our most marginalized rural young people, up from disposability to essentiality? And in our years of moving through doing youth work and rural youth work, and particularly a focus on opportunity youth and out-of-school youth, we feel like we have gotten farther and farther away from that conversation. And it started with that was at the whole, and we have Dorothy on. So that is very much what the origins of the Youth Build model was, for those of you that are on that are familiar with that. But so much of the work we were doing in rural communities. And then the more we did this work, particularly in later years, the more we felt like we were being set up, that it wasn't about all our young people and all our communities. It was about those that could compete in an urban environment, those that could compete and could figure out what were those high tech, high growth industries that could be named, and that they're young people, and that there was this formula for how we do this work, right? You identify the high growth industries, you pull the young people in, you get them their credentials as quickly as possible, and you get them placed into the workforce, and in theory, in middle skill jobs, and voila, they're on their way, poverty solved. And it's not that there aren't elements to that aren't, we are not saying that that's not, an important piece to bring to it, but it's not centering young people at the heart of it. And at the end of the day, particularly for rural communities, we know that there's a whole bunch of communities and young people that are going to be left behind in the formula. And that's sort of just assumed to be okay, right? That when we're having these conversations, that it's like, well, that's okay, except that it's not okay, and it's not okay with us, right? And then there's these other, so meanwhile, while that has been the push, it feels like from many funders and from the federal level, we also have all these other indicators going on, right? And we're speaking to the choir, so we're not going to give you all the earnest data points and articles and latest research that shows all of these pieces, but we know that these are very real pieces out there from COVID, still after COVID, that are existing for our rural young people all across the country. And right now, the current measures, so we have all of that going on, that's the backdrop, but right now the current measures of successful transition to adulthood for young people, and these will look familiar to you, are placement in a job, retention for 2 or more quarters, credential certification, starting wage, and not receiving public assistance, right? And it's like, that's successful transition to adulthood. That's what that looks like, right? So for us, this is backing up and asking this question in a really different way. And instead of what has become the predominant, piece of like, how do we meet the needs of employers, right? Which is what this is all about, versus how do we meet the needs of young people that is helping them be whole, that is helping them thrive for the rest of their lives. And these indicators are not doing that. So what if instead of focusing on employers, we recognize that focusing on credential to employer is about economics. It's not about equity and well-being for rural young people. It's a completely different employee. And what if instead of shaping the transition to adulthood to meet the needs of all employers, we shaped it to focus on the lifelong well-being of every single rural young person in this country? And we should also interject that this is not, we want this for all young people, but our work, and we're all on this call because we're focused on rural young people right now. And also, they're often getting left off completely, or maybe one or two programs is in the room in terms of the folks out there at the national level that are working around youth well-being. Rural is either not mentioned at all, how that shows up uniquely for rural young people, what those examples look like, or how resources are being driven. And instead, what if we asked young people, what does it mean to live a life well lived? Instead of saying, what career do you see yourself doing in 30 years? One of the things that I think, as you all are probably experiencing, and we've been experiencing, and the folks around our table are experiencing, is that we, like, the young people are getting hit with all the realities of the world right now, all these other indicators, and including at the forefront, the global instability right now, climate change, what the world is going to be like by 2050. And then we turn to them and we say, so what career, what kind of work do you see yourself doing 40 years from now? And they just are like, are you kidding? I mean, the level of cognitive dissonance that, like, as adults that we have to be asking that question is so ridiculous, versus saying to them, what does a life well lived mean to you? And knowing that those answers might have very, very little to do with work. So our focus is that well-being is a predictor for the long-term success. That is why we've chosen to focus on this. And our hypothesis is that by focusing on the holistic well-being of young people throughout adolescence and young adulthood, that we will generate healthier adults. It doesn't mean, and let us be clear, that when we talk about well-being, and you've already gotten chat, and we'll see as we move on, that it's not about being like perfectly happy all the time. That is not well-being, what well-being is, right? We all know that you move through the world and move through life, and you have some hard times, and you have some, like mountaintop times, right? But it's about that balance, and it's also about how you're able to see yourself as the whole, and how collectively we're seeing young people and communities as a whole. The other piece of this is that our work ultimately is focused on the collective well-being and the systems level, and that we see the well-being of our rural young people is inextricably linked to the well-being of rural communities, and urban communities are inextricably linked to rural communities. So we're all in this together.
So Kim and I were able to participate in a learning community that was sponsored by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It was an international learning group about Bhutan, and what Bhutan was doing different than the United States. And Bhutan, a king in Bhutan in the 70s said, we will not measure our country's success by its economic outputs. We'll measure our country's success by the well-being of the individuals who live here. And so they created a model that they were using to measure for the government the well-being of its citizens. So this just is a table that helps you think about what we talk about in America, and you hear it on the news every day. Where is the stock market? Where is unemployment? Where are wages right now? we are bombarded with economic measures, whereas in Bhutan, they were really measuring the success of their policies, programs, and systems at the government level by the feedback that they were getting from their residents about their well-being. Very different model. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, apologies, folks. I'm just going to interrupt for a second because I'm screen sharing, so you're going to see that come up. I realized I was blocking Kathy the slide by dropping into chat. So keep talking, Kathy, and I'll try to do this as quick as I can to drop it back, the two handouts back into chat.
I gotcha. So Bhutan created 9 domains of well-being, and you can see them around here with just some bullets about what is included in those 9 domains. And they do a periodic actual survey of residents in order to look across these domains to see what seems to be working for people and what the government actually needs to work on. And they've been doing this for quite some time. It really changes the perspective of how you think about policies and programs at the uppermost level. And we took this and we thought, wow, this is a well-being framework that we would love to bring into focus for rural and Native young people in the United States. And what would it look like if we had 9 domains and that feedback on policies and practices that were supposed to help young people have successful lives were measured by whether they were actually having successful lives. And I think that one of the most interesting things for me is right now, after COVID, our system is falling apart, right? We see that in the poor mental health of young people. We see that in the big exodus from the workforce. We see that in young people asking for better work-life balance. Those are all things that were indicators that our systems here are breaking down a little bit. And so we were really excited to see this new model and new way of thinking. And we thought, well, how do we move from Bhutan's model to something that would be more applicable to our young people? And so in Bhutan, they have a self-assessment sheet. That's what Kim just posted again to the chat. So you can go in the chat and look at the self-assessment sheet. And you can take a group of people in a room and have them do the self-assessment. And then they created this target. Kim, go ahead and change the slide, where you can then have everybody in the room sort of put their mark on the target about where they're feeling. And yes, a lot of these things are not static over time. You change. Did I have a good day? Did I have a good week? They change in that way. But for us, we had a group do those self-assessments, and then we had them record on here. And then we talked about where they were either really spread out, or we had really low, or we had really high scores, so that they could begin to talk about sort of the commonalities they're feeling, where their challenges are, and what the systems that are affecting them in those spaces are. We know that these self-assessment tools can just be used individually for people who are thinking about what is my life like right now and where do I need to do work, and they are being used that way. But for Kim and I, based on Bhutan, this is about systems change. Go ahead, Kim. So we created a working group from across programs, across geography, across populations, in order to come together and really think about how we could move from Bhutan's model to something that might be more applicable for young people. And this group has been meeting over the last 2 years to really think about that transition of the language around Bhutan's model to our youth model. Go ahead, Kim. So it's really for us about systems change. Even though this well-being assessment that you now have in chat is a personal measure, by using them collectively, we can see where people collectively are struggling and look deeper at those places to figure out what systems, institutions, programs, and processes are happening in the background that are limiting people's ability to strive for a better level of well-being. So we really thought about this patterns of change and root causes, and we took, go ahead, you're good, moving on. Yeah, so we took the working group through a couple different activities, more than just these two, but these two were really instrumental in us digging deeper into why are we stuck? Why are the outcomes so poor right now? So the iceberg is really about thinking about what you see. So we talked about what we saw, positive and negative, in our communities. And then we dug a little deeper. So we looked at the trends, we looked at underlying structures, and we looked at these mental models and messaging that we were either getting from other people or generating ourselves that sort of kept us in this space of struggle. And so in this iceberg, we talked about things like the mental health crisis of young people, or the vitriolic conversations that are happening in rural communities that help us, are helping divide neighbors because they think differently, and it's all about debate versus discussion. And we really talked about the structures that are at play here, capitalism and the way our economies are structured as extraction economies, and the whole limited access to programs and processes. And we really wanted to get people to really understand deeply what was going on in our communities and where are the leverage points around mental models and design that could help us get unstuck. Go ahead, Kim. Go ahead. So the other thing we did was we used a 3 horizons model. And the first horizon is really what is happening right now. What are the structures we have in place? What are the mental models that drive those structures? What is the data about what's going on right now? And then you have the third horizon, and I'm going to do first and third, and then I'll talk about the second. And the third horizon is an emerging future that you can't really describe except in desired characteristics and maybe some new and innovative ideas about what could potentially happen. So the third horizon is still emerging, but we could talk about what characteristics we wanted to see in the third horizon. And we could talk about what are the systems and institutions that play in the first horizon. The second horizon is an interesting one because there's a lot of work always being done in the second horizon where entrepreneurs are looking at the first horizon and what's not working and making innovations and incremental change to programs and processes that are happening in the first horizon. We've seen some of that around education, where this idea of the voucher system was going to be the next innovation in education to help get education equality. Not all those innovations work. Not all those innovations are good, but there's constantly churn in these innovations. Some of these innovations keep us in Horizon 1. They actually enable things that are broken in Horizon 1 to maintain their hold on our community and not let us jump to Horizon 3. So whenever we look at these ideas that are happening in Horizon 2, these new innovations and changes, we need to ask ourselves, does this innovation hold us back in Horizon 1? Or is it enable us to do a leap to Horizon 3? And so we actually had people sort of map out what's in Horizon 1 right now. Capitalism is in Horizon 1. Our public education system is in Horizon 1. Our current healthcare system is in Horizon 1. And we know that we shouldn't throw all those things out. There are good parts of those, and there are parts of those that aren't working. So we had them sort of list what is in Horizon 1. And then we talked about the characteristics of Horizon 3 and what would we save from Horizon 1 if we were creating a new future. What are the pieces that we would really want to hold on to because they're either a framework of what works and just needs some fixing, or they're things that broke through at a different time, and that breakthrough is still important for us in the future. Public education is an important one that they pointed out, this idea that everyone has the right to a good education. They like that. They didn't think it was working very well. But So we talked about what we were going to keep in third horizon. I encourage you, one of the things when we left this meeting with our working group, at the next working group meeting, people said, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe how many times I heard things and I said to myself, these are Horizon 2 innovations. Are they holding us in Horizon 1? Are they pushing us to Horizon 3? It was like a window opened up for people about how to think about what we hear on a regular basis and how we match us to this future, this emerging future that we really want to see. So these activities, go ahead, Kim. These activities really helped us understand the systems, the mindsets, the elements of Horizon 1 and the dreams of Horizon 3 that helped us come back and create a well-being framework for young people. Take it away, Kim.
Sure. So after all of walking ourselves through all of this over a year and a half, 2 years, we created then as the group, the working group, we created our framework of 9 domains. Now, a couple things. We also during that time did pretty darn extensive research of what are the other well-being frameworks out there. And a couple things to note about that. So anywhere we could, we would pop it up, we would read it, we would take a look, we would analyze what's strong, what's missing, and something to reflect on is that one of the things we discovered is pretty much all of the frameworks that we saw were not about collective and systems level change, right? And that was a difference between what are youth well-being frameworks in the US or just simply well-being frameworks. It's very interesting what is left off. So they're just really ways of thinking, and it's not that they don't have some great pieces to them, they absolutely do, but how we're sort of coming at this differently is from that collective and systems level place. So they tend to hit, and sometimes with really gorgeous ways, what we would call the individual social emotional learning side of things. What they all left off is things like identity and culture for the most part. Community and civic life were completely left off. And sorry, we've renamed this, sorry, I put up the wrong one. We've renamed this community and civic life. So when you look back at the Bhutan wheel and you think about good governance, and which for us is reflected from a youth level in community and civic life, when we look at nature and environment, when you look at time use and financial and economic. So anything that tied to larger systems is almost always left off, if not always left off of any youth well-being framework. And yet these are the things that are inextricably linked to any young person's well-being in the moment, as well as their futures. So another quick thing about the working group is that we, in addition to pulling folks together in all the ways that Kathy talked about, we also wanted to make sure that we had everyone around the table that had either contact with or day in and day out was working with rural young people, so that we had that representation. So we did not have just say what often happens, which is 3 rural young people or 5 rural young people. This was also a deliberate choice on our part. And instead, we wanted to make sure that this was going to be an ongoing conversation between the members of the working group, and then going back out and all through our different pieces of work and our iterations, and whether it was Horizon 1 or Horizon 3, that we were having as many touch points with young people as possible. And we'll get to that as well. And that was then being brought back to the table, and it was understood to be part of what, the working group members were doing. So what we did, and here you have it, is the framework. You can see the different domains. And you can see how some of it is similar and some of it is different to the Bhutan one. But after, as Kathy said, walking through and trying to push ourselves hard around systems analysis, around thinking about the emergent future, about after, being deep in youth work and practice and in rural communities, this is what we have created. This is meant to work at both the individual and the systems level. So that's really important to realize is this is for us and and both framework. And that this framework is meant to shape practice and policy. So it is meant that staff can take a look at it, that anyone can take a look at it, funders, and everyone sees a way that they can play a part. And that it's not just like, well, my work is over in this domain, right? Too often the way these well-being conversations happen is like, well, I'm in the classroom, or I do employer engagement, or I do, I build national partnerships, or whatever that may be, right? And it's like, so I just send that person off to the counselor or off to the advocate or whatever the role and title might be. Or, if you're working at the intermediary level or the foundation level or, policy level, it's like, well, that's really great, but you all need to just go do your special sauce youth work because we're focused on these much bigger things. And that's something that came up over and over again, is that this is that everyone looks at that framework and they see themselves as part of the whole. It's meant to shape program design. It's meant to shape curriculum. We also wanted this to be something that folks could look at and not see it as one more new thing that was supposed to be learned, but instead that aligns with already with trauma-informed and healing-centered engagement work, UDL, work-based learning, civic engagement. So all those folks where that's their area of expertise are part of the group. CAST is in the room, Circle is in the room. And it's meant to see that it's like, this just helps pulls all those parts together and helps build those, right? UDL helps build well-being, right? Trauma-informed practice helps build well-being. Civic engagement is core to well-being, and so on. It can be used for staff development to shape the culture and climate of programs in schools, to build the collective, and then ultimately to take it from there to build the collective well-being of rural youth and communities and be a way to drive where resources and money get spent. And then last but not least, our other goal is to bring this work and the analysis and this framework and actually have it complement and contribute to these larger urban youth conversations, or just these conversations about rural well-being, rural community well-being, or urban community well-being, or just well-being, right? And what's interesting is those conversations. So in the rural development world, they're using the language of thriving and well-being, and that we've got these frameworks. And yet there's not a single piece of that that has anything that even mentions young people. We also took a really hard and painful look at all of that. And the goal for all of us is to be able to take this and say, hey, let's team together. Here's what you've left off, right? And here's also how you are part of this framework. We then, each of those domains we created a self-assessment, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but here, so each of those domains has some different indicators or definitions under them. So here's a couple of examples, and these are particularly created for young people, for rural young people to be able to read. And we created a similar assessment process to what Bhutan has created, which is not unlike many well-being assessments, right? But you can see here's some of the different domains and examples. We wrangled long and hard over this, and also finding the language that is the language and definitions for young people, and not all our layered adult and practitioner assumptions about everything that should be in here. So the assessment is meant to be owned by the individual, right? In addition, there's all kinds of, like, as adults, how we help young people build their toolkits, conversations that we want to have with them. But the assessment is not us as adults. And here's a couple other examples. It is not us as adults measuring those young people. It is about young people getting to self-determine. So why did we do this? Because one of the lessons we learned from the Bhutan study group and from listening and talking and all this research from others is that we also needed that it is really, really radical, actually, to be putting an immediate tool and that agency into the hands of rural young people. Either people are staying at such a broad systems level that it's like, you know, it will take years and years and years, and, you know, we're all working on a world that we will never see in our lifetimes. Or it's only about the individual change of young people. So we see this self-assessment in this domain is radical, both because we are immediately handing this to young people, and it's not us measuring them, as we already said. It's also not this list of competencies that that we will be testing you on, and once you're proficient, then you're well, right? But the other piece that's radical about it, and this was a real lesson learned from Bhutan, is that it actually names systems that affect your well-being, even when you don't have the ability to control those. But actually, anyone that's a survivor of any kind of trauma knows that when you actually get to see yourself and your reality reflected, right? Even if you're like, I'm scoring really low in that, it's like, but you're actually not putting the blame on me. And that's the default thing that happens with so many of these individual focused assessments, is that it's like, well, here's where you are. Now let's talk about the skills that you need so you're not there and it's all on you. Versus when I get to take a look at what are these other factors that are out there and how that all drives. And that builds a sense of understanding and investment in collective well-being and systems change for young people, right? So it's not the youth needing to do their individual work and we, the adults, which is too often the way this goes, are systems focused. The other piece of this, as I was mentioning, but where we're at now, and Kathy will talk about this in just a second, is that we deliberately have taken this and are using it, and it was designed with for and with rural youth across race, young people with disabilities, LGBTQ, first gen, undocumented youth, justice involved, living across all the pockets of the country, right? So that was our other intention, is that we could take this, create this, and immediately know that it could be put into use immediately nationally and get that. It's also being used in a wide range of settings, in and out of school, education and workforce training, drop-in shelters, community centers, independent living centers, and so on. Whoops, sorry. Kathy, you want to tag in?
Sorry about that. So we created this framework and we're using the ideas behind human-centered design with the idea that this framework is a prototype, that from the input we've gotten from lots and lots of people, we think is pretty close, but we're in the process right now of going out and testing that in the field. Testing that directly with young people who will take the self-assessment, talk to us about the bullets under the self-assessment, really help us identify whether they believe that this tool allows them to be heard. And we're doing this with other partners to look at how teachers could use it, or what they need, or how institutions can help it think about their programming. So right now we're in human-centered design phase, where we're taking the prototype out to lots of different stakeholder groups to get input so that we can change this design as needed to best meet the needs of stakeholder groups. So I've done a couple, I don't want to call them focus groups. They were groups of young people who actually took the self-assessment we'd created. And it was really interesting how critical they were about some of the factors and whether they felt like the factors were appropriately worded. And I'll give you an example. One of the factors under learning and education is that I feel like I can fail and learn from my failure. And they said, that is not my problem. My problem is when I fail, my teachers think I'm a failure, or my parents think I'm a failure, and that never leaves me. It follows me everywhere. And it was just sort of a light coming on about, oh yeah, this isn't just about them and them being able to control their own future. We really need to think about the context in which they live, the ecosystem and environment in which they live, and how do we make changes there? And so that idea of failure really becomes, am I given the space to fail and learn from my failure without stigma from people around me? And it's like, oh yeah. So we are in the process. We think we'll probably be in this process for the next, I don't know, 5 or 6 months, just trying to get this out to as many groups as we can. And I was thinking when I was looking at the diagram of our framework, it's like, oh yeah, some of those circles are little, some of those circles are big. It's like, this looks like a prototype. Like we pasted this on a piece of paper and now we're going out into the community. And that's exactly where we are right now, trying to figure out what the product is that will really make the most difference as we move forward in this process. Go ahead, Kim. So one of the things that Kim and I have struggled with is how do we validate, because we know there are people out there who want a validated system. Dorothy, remember how painful that was to move Youth Build USA through evidence-based testing in order to be called an evidence-based solution.
Right.
And we've really been pushing back about this idea that we would need to count anything, because that just is a Horizon 1 answer. And so one of the things we've been thinking about is, how do we measure success of all the different myriad of adaptions or adoptions of this thinking about well-being framework, and really be able to point to success. So both in the iceberg, which was before this, Kim, when we think about the iceberg, we should, I don't know when, a couple of years from now, be able to think about events that are happening, the language that's being used in media and media reports, and then some of these patterns and trends in mindset, and be able to track changes in those places that will help us figure out whether this well-being framework and embedding well-being thinking in as many people as we can reach is making a difference. And now you can go on, Kim. And that takes us to this first, second, and third horizon. Could we, 2 years from now, think about those first horizon things that we already named and what the innovations have been that we've seen individuals do, schools do, programs do, funders do, and is that taking us to some of the third horizon characteristics that we had named at the very beginning? And while I know there are still people who are going to look at data and feel like data is what it's all about, we are resistant to putting that layer back on the system, because I think it loses the detail of the nuances of what happens when people begin to come together and just think about how they could work together and do things together in a collective well-being way. So this is sort of our process, what we're thinking about as far as success. And I think this is one of the places where we would encourage anyone who wanted to be part of this testing process, I'd like to use this with my group, and I'd love to give you feedback about what they thought about it. We're creating some forms and some coaching pieces that help people do this. Or what do my staff think about this? Do they have ideas about how we might change, so that we can begin to start capturing both how people are using it, what they're using it for, And what are the outcomes and ideas that are happening in their institutions, in their communities, with their young people that we should capture and be able to report back when it comes to what changes when you really think about well-being. And if everyone has the ability to have well-being across all the domains, do we look more equitable? Do people feel like there's better equity? So, and that's where we are right now. And I'm going to tag it back to you, Kim.
So one of the things that's happened to us, so while we are testing the prototype, right, that is the assessment tool, and as part of that, the framework. Meanwhile, this framework is there and people are off and running with it. So, and we've been off and sharing it. We don't anticipate, so far from the feedback we've been getting from young people, a lot of change in the actual domains, but more what we may need to tweak within the assessment tool and the definitions themselves. So we are trying to actually pedal as fast as we can to keep up with the folks that are already taking this framework and out there using it. So whether we have school systems that have reached out, we have charter schools that have reached out, we have youth programs that have reached out. We've presented it and been able to lead sessions at the Aspen convening for those of you there, Partners for Rural Impact. We're about to be with the Vermont Rural Development Council in like a couple weeks to their statewide summit. So it's super exciting. It's also this piece that Kathy and I and the group is very aware of reminding folks, and this gets back to that Horizon 1 versus Horizon 3 slide, which is that systems actual level and systems change happens in a lot of different ways. And that is something that brings us right back to Ruby Sales and her reminding us that it's as much about changing minds and hearts and building a public theology as it is about policy. So if we're all really honest with ourselves, when we think about systems change, we always think about the federal government, right? And that is definitely, that is policy and resources, but that is almost always the last to change. Meanwhile, we have all these great examples out there of folks that are already taking it. So we were originally going to have a few folks on. Their lives, they were not able to because it is a Thursday in July and they are running youth programs. So instead we have a couple examples just to share with you. So Abby Ritter, who is now with Able South Carolina, and which is an independent living center set of programs in South Carolina. She previously led the youth work for the national organization, the Association of Rural Programs for Independent Living, and she's part of our working group. And she sent off an example saying that it has completely, learning this and working with these frameworks and how to think about 9 domains has totally changed and shaped the way that she now builds both program design and assessment. And she has been taking this, taking the assessment tool and the framework and using it with the young people, and then the young people, working with the young people to both get a sense of, to build their collective well-being picture within their group, but also to set goals. And she's seen some really pretty incredible ways of when the young people have 9 domains to focus on, what they've actually chosen to focus on and the goals that they've been able to set and the change that's happened. The second one, and some of you may know Santa Fe Youth Works and Malin, they are also part of the working group. And Malin sent actually several like talking points for how that she has been using it. So she has trained now all the staff in the Wellbeing framework, and they have taken the 9 domains, and their entire program is designed across the 9 domains, both philosophically as well as programmatically. So staff are trained now to carry that holistic level and the collective well-being level, and to really, she's really pushed so that they are all thinking at even as they're working individually or with different cohorts of young people, that they're really thinking at the systems level across the 9 domains. They make sure that everything they're doing is touching each of those domains and how they interrelate. And that they are very intentionally, and they've always done this, they just now really, really hang it onto the framework, embrace the culture and values of the program, of the community that they're in. So they're really intentionally carrying that forward. And they're really working that the young people see themselves as part of the collective whole, and that they see that their collective engagement has impact and that they are stewards in the community. And they also are working, and always have, to allow young people to learn about their community and express their views. So they've really sought to pull in the civic learning and the community gathering, and very intentionally. But Malin also pointed out this piece that young people are really the ones driving that and are the consultants, versus all too often the way the framing now happens, that young people are being used as the impact mechanism that's being declared by the adults. Then we have folks, for instance, Vanessa Bennett has been joining us a lot. She's with JFF, and she's really talked about how this has really shaped the framework, and the 9 domains has really now shaped how she thinks about not just workforce development as a whole, but particularly work-based learning and apprenticeship, and how centering well-being really changes that, and how work-based learning and apprenticeship become tools to drive well-being and not just employer engagement. So those are a few examples. We know that we are now got about 10 minutes, 5 minutes left, depending upon what the time in your day looks like. So we wanted to give us a moment for you to be able to ask questions or comments, and then I just have a couple of wrap-up slides. But before I do that, let me just say that, building off of the example I was just saying, that we have a podcast coming out really, really soon, where we have, well, we probably sound a little clunky, but the people that we're talking to don't sound clunky. I definitely sound clunky. But instead of asking all of these different organizations to write articles, which takes forever, about what they're doing and how they're using it, instead we interviewed them. And we've tried to keep it to about 15 to 20 minutes, so short, easy to listen to, but already how they're using the framework, how it's changed their thinking, and really getting at that systems change happens at a lot of different levels, but also to spark the ideas for folks. So anyway, we would love to hear what your thoughts are, questions, comments. We're a small group, so don't be shy. And Erin, you joined us a little late. It's wonderful to have you on. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, everyone. Dorothy.
Oh, that's a nice quote you just put up from a rural
Yeah,
youth graduate. You'll see. We got a lot of youth-built quotes.
Yeah.
First of all, this has been wonderful and very exciting to listen to. And it's so parallel to something that I've been working on that I'll just share with you, which is I've had a working group of my college classmates, the class of 1963, called Transforming Our Economy. We convened at our 60th college reunion, a group of about 80 people, to say, what does activism in our 80s look like? And then I continued to convene this group. And we have produced a 2-page summary, which I will want to share with you, about necessary steps in transforming our economy, and saying basically the fact that our economy is concentrating wealth and power in the top 1% and perpetuating extreme inequality and oppression and exploitation and extraction has got to be changed if we're all going to survive. And then we have 8 points. The first one of which is to change the way we measure the economy from GDP to well-being measures, which some people, which you started out with, which I was excited to see. So I'd love to share that with you. And we're trying to figure out, how do we use this? And we've also put together, I've been doing a lot of reading about people's thinking about the new economy, about horizon number 3. So
Yep.
horizon number 3, as you said, is not yet described. It's not yet named. There's not yet a movement that is united across movements that knows where it's going. And they're terrified whether to talk about capitalism or not, because they're afraid of being called socialists or communists. And yet, and I have a list of about, 50 different names for the new economy: the solidarity economy, the green economy, the healthy economy, the fair economy, the good economy. It goes on and on and on that I've collected from different writings. And I have a whole list of books on the economy that people have written toward this goal, and a whole lot of organizations working toward it. So I was just very delighted and excited to see what you have created inside the youth development space. And I'll just say, that of course Youth Build was created in Horizon number 2. And we spent the last 40 years navigating around and within the systems to get bipartisan support to create an oasis that was not oppressive, that
Right.
was outside the oppression, that wasn't being, and we did that successfully, but we didn't do systems change. We created our own system that would not perpetuate the oppression and which would liberate young people in all the ways you're talking about. And we had, I don't know if you've included in your thinking the 17 qualities of a successful program that counteract the oppressive things that they usually see. And of course, what you're talking about how the world tries to talk about individual success and job training and placement in jobs, and that's the whole goal. That's why we put so much emphasis in Youth Build on leadership development, leadership development, leadership development. But anyway, that's enough said. I will send you the 2-page summary, and if you want the lists of names and books. We also have a list of legislation that has been already been introduced in Congress, although obviously something passed under the current time, that would make a significant difference in changing the economic system. So,
Right.
Enough for me. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for doing this. It's so exciting, and it will be relevant to the Youth Create project that I'm working on at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dorothy. Would absolutely love to see your piece. And when we were part of that, of the Bhutan study group, right? That most of the folks around the table were working at that economy, high level, countrywide level, stage, and there was a lot of it that, as Kathy would say, she and I were in the swirling dust, because we were like, so we did really youth, and you all are doing these, countrywide measures, which was really exciting, really pushed us in different ways, right? To think so. And one of the pieces then that we carried back was then looking at these broader, which is something that wasn't new, we've all known, right? Is when you see in the world of rural development frameworks, and it's like, and once again, youth isn't part of this. And once again, you've just given out all these recommendations or, pieces, and youth isn't part of it. How do you expect our economies and our communities to thrive in the next 20 to 50 years if you haven't mentioned youth at all, right? So,
Right.
so anyway, that's exactly, yes, so would love to
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
have what you're
And
sharing.
one other thing to say, I'm sorry to say one other thing, but the other group that I've been following closely is Reverend Barber's Poor People's Campaign.
Right.
Because he's the only guy who's really deliberately trying to unite all the poor people, the white, the
Right.
black, the Latino, and he's just put out a book, which I just finished reading, called White Poverty, which I hope you've read. If not, I mean, he's definitely trying to build the movement that includes rural, white, poor, and indigenous
Right.
people in a way that nobody else is.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Reverend Barber and Ruby Sales have done a lot of organizing together through the years. Absolutely. You're completely right. And we've connected about that. The other thing I was going to say, Dorothy, in terms of like, what are the conditions and the pieces, there are really gorgeous and beautiful things that are, we'd be remiss to not say, and to build on what you were saying, that are pulling forward, are things to bring forward with us into the emergent future, right? From that original youth build model and from those. So then there's a whole host of stuff that practitioners need to help, and the tools they need, how you create the conditions to, at the program level, right? That all fit into this framework, that are all part of that. Aliska, you dropped, and I'm aware of time, you dropped a question into chat about participatory action research. And I just wanted to say, yes, we did not set about this. So to be clear, we did not come at this from now we will do participatory action research, right? We came at it from a integrated human-centered design, but that has, PAR built into it. The other pieces that we were everyone around the table, and Kathy and I were very mindful of what are the underlying, pieces of participatory action research. So part of the just way we went about the last 2 years in the working group has been very much that piece of nothing about us without us, right? And that, so everyone around the table was part of that, just in who and where and how they're doing their work, but also that piece of ongoing conversation with young people and staff back, right? So we were hitting all those communities and all those categories, right? And that everyone coming was already on day one bringing all of that to bear to the conversation versus what sometimes happens, which is, excuse me, talking too long.
Well, and I was just gonna throwing it up more as you're talking about the validation and evaluation, because I think there are some models, particularly in the international context, where they're trying to move away from log frame numerical evaluations, that the participatory action research model could give that validation you're looking for in a different way. That's why, I mean, I know the model all sound like what you've done is that model, but then taking it to the next step.
You are absolutely right. And that is, yeah, totally. And lots of rich conversation around how to do qualitative, how to do, right, community-driven pieces. So we are not, we should also clarify that we are not at all like saying, oh no, we don't want to do any of that. It's just, we're like, we need to be out there using this. We need to be, not just we, but collectively, right? And it's not that mean showing effectiveness is important, but we all also already know the answer to that, right? On some level, right? And so we're also trying to resist that and just push people to be like, so let's just actually work with this and do work with this and practice what it would take to shape and frame policy recommendations and responses around this. And let's push our thinking to horizon 2 and 3 in the best of ways before we get all caught up and like, here's our independent analysis, right? If that makes sense. So hopefully that aligned with what you were saying and didn't mean, we did the last one we meant to dismiss. Let's see, have I missed anything else? Oh, ripple effects mapping. Yeah, super. Yes, Aaron, totally agree with that. Absolutely. Super cool. And would love to also connect with you on that. So any other questions or comments? Because otherwise I'll quickly close us out. Super. Thank you, Aaron. That's, and just to close out, this just popped up, those, when you have young people in your social media feed, and this popped up a little bit ago from a Rural Youth Build graduate that we'd known, that had come to the Rural Youth Caucus and just been part of this. And we were, it was at the point where Kathy and I were deep in being part of the Bhutan study group and all of this, and there it was. And it was like, they were pulling forward what I think is someone else's quote, right? But, and we were like, this is it. This is just a really clear reminder of how young people, and not just Youth Build graduates, but over and over and over again, our young people across our communities are not interested and do not see their success. Yes, we are not minimizing, we're not creating a utopian fantasy here. Work matters. Not being in poverty is essential to well-being, right? But it's not the only thing, right? And that at the end of this is how our young people would say, I've won the lottery of life, right? This is for them what leading a life well lived means. So, coming
Well,
up,
I think, Kim, I'd like to add something, because I
course.
think they would say that, but many Youth Build graduates have also said leading a life well lived means they are effective change agents.
Absolutely.
They have learned that they can make a difference, and we have a lot of graduates who are now running their own nonprofits, creating
Right,
their own movements,
right.
doing all of this work, and so gaining your own sense of agency is key
Right.
to well-being.
That's at the heart, right? Belonging, agency, resiliency, all of that is baked into those. We started to be like, which domains do these live in is the working group. We've wrestled way too long with that and realized they live in every single domain, right?
Right.
So I didn't mean to suggest that that is the only piece, but that is just a really lovely reframe
Right.
and reminder in it all. Just to let everyone know, our next in our series is going to be Amanda Bastoni, who leads the career tech and adult ed work for CAST. And CAST is focused on universal design for learning and making education work for every single learner. And she has been doing some incredible work about using STEM to create STEM pathways for rural young people, but how to build STEM identity through community and civic engagement in the outdoors. Super cool work she's been doing in across the country now, but started in very rural northern New Hampshire. And Amanda will be on with a couple of the colleagues she's worked with from the University of New Hampshire. And then in November, we will have Mara Teakin, who is head of the education department at Bates College and has done a lot of research on rural education and rural youth, and particularly around rural school closures, which is a huge issue impacting the well-being of our communities and our young people. So those are the next two on deck, and you'll get emails about those. If you are interested in working with testing the prototype and actually having the self-assessment tool to work with, we would love to share it with you. If you want to just email us or give us a call or drop it into chat. We are just asking that folks stay in touch with us, and we have a particular process. It's not onerous, but as Kathy talked about, for actually doing the prototype testing. And the framework, we just would love you to be taking, to be using, to help shape your thinking. It's out there, it's live. And again, we are just wanting to circle back to folks in like 6 months or so and just do a check-in and say, hey, how is it, if anything, changed your thinking or what you're doing or whatever that might look like. So we totally invite you to stay in conversation and stay in touch with us. thank you all for coming, for being part of this on a July Thursday. And thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.